Welcome to this course on Introduction to Java Programming. Here's Module 1, the Introduction. Contains 3 lessons. Lesson 1, we'll take a look at the Introduction to Java, and then I'll explain the course agenda. Lesson 2 is what Java is and how does it work. So we'll take a look at in detail what is Java programming languages and the structure of the language itself. So Java is essentially a programming language expressly designed for use in the distributed environment of the internet. Primarily, it looks like C++ language, but it is simpler to use than C++ and enforces an object-oriented programming model. In Lesson 3, moving forward, we'll take a look at how to install important software before we can, in fact, start using Java. And these software include various editors that we need to run the Java code, as well as other software such as the Java Development Kit or the Java Runtime Environment. Module 2 is about conditionals. This module has 9 lessons. In Lesson 1, we'll begin coding in Java using a simple program that would allow you to understand the structure of the Java language itself. Lesson 2, we'll get into the concept of using variables, what variables are and how do they work. So a Java variable is simply a piece of memory that can contain any data value. So a variable thus has a data type in essence, and I'll cover various data types in more detail once we get to that lesson. Lesson 3 is strings, working with text. And strings, which are widely used in Java programming, are simply a sequence of characters. So in this particular Java language, strings are objects. The Java platform also provides the strings class to create and manipulate strings. Lesson 4 will get into the while loops. And what a while loop does, it repeats a statement or a group of statements while a given condition is true. Lesson 5 will get into the for loops. And for loop simply executes a sequence of statements multiple times, in fact, and abbreviates the code that manages the loop variable. Next, in Lesson 6, we'll get into the if statements. And once again, this is a conditional statement that consists of a Boolean expression followed by one or more statements. Lesson 7 is getting user input, which is simply allows the user to input data before Java can execute its code. In Lesson 8, I'll explain the do-while statements, which is very similar to a while statement, except that it tests the condition at the end of the loop body. And finally, Lesson 9, we'll take a look at the concept of switch. So a switch statement simply allows a variable to be tested for equality against a list of values. And each value essentially is called a case, and the variable being switched on is checked for each case. Our next module is all about arrays. 3 lessons in this module. Very important, we'll take a look at what an array is in Java programming. So essentially, an array is just a container object that holds a fixed number of values of a single type. And the length of the array is established when the array is created. Lesson 2 is arrays of strings. So in Java, multi-dimensional arrays or arrays of strings are actually arrays within arrays. And these, as you might expect, look and act like regular multi-dimensional arrays. However, as we'll see, there are a couple of subtle differences, and I'll explain those once we get to these lessons. Module 4 will dive into the programming core Java. 7 lessons in this module. First lesson talks about classes and objects. And this is an important conceptual understanding of Java here that I'll explain and demonstrate. So a class is nothing but a blueprint or a template for creating different objects, which defines its properties and behaviors. So for example, Java class objects, they exhibit the properties and behaviors defined by its class. And a class can contain fields and various methods to describe the behavior of an object. Lesson 2 is where we'll get into the concept of methods. So a Java method, think of that as a collection of statements that are grouped together to perform an operation. Lesson 3 will get into the concept of getters and return values. And lesson 4 will talk about the method parameters. So essentially, lesson 3, 4, and 5 are all about working with different kinds of methods. So getters and setters, for instance, are used to retrieve and manipulate private variables in a different class. So a getter method does, as its name suggests, retrieves the attribute of the same name. Lesson 5, moving forward, we'll take a look at setters and this. And once again, we'll take a look at the setters method, and we'll take a look at how this method is used in Java. Lesson 6, we'll take a look at constructors. So a constructor is simply a special type of method that is used to initialize the object itself. Lesson 7 will talk about the static keyword in Java, which simply means that the variable or the function is shared between all instances of the class as it belongs to the type, not the actual objects themselves though. So module 5 is working with strings. 6 lessons in this module. Lesson 1 is we'll take a look at how Java uses the string builder and string formatting. In other words, I'll demonstrate various concepts such as string concatenation and so on. Lesson 2 is the toString method. So this Java toString method is used when we need a string representation of an object. So we'll take a look at how that works. Lesson 3 is about inheritance in Java. So inheritance here refers to a feature of Java programming that lets you create classes that are derived from other classes. And lesson 4 will get into the concept of Java packages. And once again, a Java package is a technique for organizing various Java classes into different namespaces similar to those of modules. And lesson 5 will dive into the concept of interfaces in Java. And what that is similar to a class. So it is a collection of abstract methods that we'll take a look at in greater detail. And finally, in lesson 6 within the module, we'll take a look at the concept of public, private, and protected variables. And these variables are visible to all classes. So we'll take a look at, for example, how private variables are visible only to the class to which they belong to, as compared to the protected variables, which are those variables that are visible only to the class to which they belong to, and any other subclasses as well. So module 6, we'll take a look at the concept of child classes and using wildcards in Java. 6 lessons in this module. Lesson 1 is polymorphism, or using the child class. Lesson 2 is about encapsulation and the API docs. Encapsulation is one of the 4 fundamental object-oriented programming concepts. The other 3, of course, are inheritance, polymorphism, and abstraction. So think of encapsulation in Java as a mechanism of wrapping the data variables and code acting on these methods together as one single unit. Lesson 3 is casting numerical values, and lesson 4 is upcasting and downcasting. So in lesson 3 and 4, we'll take a look at the concept of primarily the casting and downcasting. And these are an important part of Java, by the way, which allows us to build complicated programs using simple syntax. And it gives us great advantages like polymorphism or grouping different objects. Lesson 5 is where we'll talk about using generics, and lesson 6 we'll take a look at both the generics and the wildcards. And the wildcard in Java is simply a special type of parameter that controls the type safety, for example, of the use of these generic types. It can be used in variable declarations as well as in method definitions as well. Module 7, we'll take a look at a couple of projects, and these projects are primarily whatever we've learned in previous lessons. I'll demonstrate by using simple programs and code just to reinforce some of the learning concepts. And finally, Module 8 will conclude this course, and I will recap several lessons that we've learned and the key concepts in Java. So by the end of this course, you'll be comfortable understanding the structure of the programming language, as well as various methods, classes, variables, and how actually Java works. and you'll also be able to write simple Java programs. So with this, let's move to our next lesson.